The dashboard camera catches everything. Officer James Hoffman slams Terrell Washington against the hood of the patrol car. Food containers scattering across the street. "You people never learn," Hoffman snarls. Washington locks eyes with the camera, a subtle smile forming. The trap has been sprung. Before we dive into this shocking story of racial injustice and undercover investigation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories exposing the truth behind the badge. What would you do if you were in Terrell's position, facing discrimination while secretly holding all the power? Let's find out what happens next in this incredible true story of justice served. Terrell Washington sat across from Assistant Director Clarissa Chen in the secure conference room at the FBI headquarters, his expression neutral, despite the gravity of what she was describing. At 39 years old, Washington had spent 15 years with the Bureau, the last 7, specializing in internal affairs investigations that required deep cover work. "The Millfield Police Department has a serious problem," Chen explained, sliding a folder across the polished table. "We've received numerous complaints of racial profiling and civil rights violations, but every investigation hits a wall." Washington flipped through the documents, noting the patterns immediately. 3 separate complaints filed by black residents had mysteriously disappeared from official records, and 2 witnesses had recanted their statements after alleged intimidation by officers. Chen continued, her voice steady. "We need someone on the inside, someone they won't suspect. Your undercover work in Baltimore last year, exposing police misconduct, was exemplary. We think you're the right person for this assignment." Washington nodded, understanding why he'd been selected. Not only did he have the undercover expertise, but as a black man, he would likely experience firsthand the discrimination they were investigating. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Washington would pose as a food delivery driver for a local app-based service called QuickBite. This position would allow him to move freely throughout Millfield, observing officer behavior while appearing innocuous. His cover included an apartment in Westridge, a primarily black neighborhood that had reported the most incidents of harassment and profiling. Before leaving headquarters, Washington received a detailed briefing from Marcus Green, a local community organizer who had been quietly documenting incidents for years. "Most folks are too scared to file formal complaints," Green explained, pointing to a map with clusters of red pins. "This teenager here was hospitalized after what they called a routine stop. This elderly woman had her home searched without a warrant. They claim they had reasonable suspicion, but never say what it was." Green leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Watch out for Officer James Hoffman. 42 years old, patrol supervisor, been with the department 11 years. He's got the most complaints that never seem to stick. Something happens to the paperwork, witnesses change their stories, evidence disappears." Washington memorized the face in the department photo, a square-jawed white man with cold eyes and a tight smile that never reached them. That evening, Washington discussed the assignment with his wife, Ayanna, a civil rights attorney whose work had often intersected with his own investigations. "I don't like this one," she said, packing his bags with practiced efficiency. "Millfield has a reputation. The officers there protect each other, and the chief has political connections." Washington nodded, understanding her concerns. "That's exactly why someone needs to go in." He paused, looking at a framed photo on their dresser. "Did I ever tell you that the chief there, Bennett Evans, served in the same precinct as the officers who beat my cousin during that traffic stop?" Ayanna stopped packing, turning to face him. "Terrell, you never mentioned that." Washington picked up the photo himself at 18, arm around his cousin Marcus, who sported a cast and facial bruises. The officers claimed he resisted. Security footage from a nearby store showed otherwise, but it mysteriously disappeared from evidence. No consequences, not even a reprimand. He set the photo down carefully. This assignment just became personal. Over the next week, Washington prepared his cover identity meticulously. He memorized local streets and restaurants, practiced the delivery routine until it became second nature, and set up surveillance equipment in his delivery bag and vehicle. The FBI provided him with a modified delivery app that recorded all interactions and locations. His handler, Agent Sofia Rodriguez, would pose as his sister living nearby, providing technical support and emergency backup if needed. "Remember, you're not there to make arrests or confront anyone," Rodriguez reminded him during their final briefing. "Document everything. Build the case. Let us handle the rest." When Washington arrived in Millfield, he spent the first day settling into his cover apartment in Westridge, a modest one-bedroom unit in a building that had seen better days. From his window, he noticed something odd: unmarked police vehicles regularly patrolling the neighborhood, despite its low crime rate, according to official statistics. His neighbor, Mrs. Jackson, an elderly woman who had lived in the building for 40 years, knocked on his door that evening with a homemade sweet potato pie. "Welcome to the building," she said warmly, but her eyes held caution. "You seem like a nice young man, so let me give you some advice. Be careful driving after dark around here. My grandson was pulled over 3 times in 1 week last month." Washington accepted the pie with thanks. 3 times. What for? Mrs. Jackson's smile faded. "They don't need a reason here. Just be careful." As she left, Washington made his first note in the investigation log: possible pattern of pretextual stops in predominantly black neighborhood. The assignment had officially begun, and Washington could already feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just another case. It was about justice for people like Mrs. Jackson's grandson, for his own cousin, and for countless others whose voices had been silenced by a system designed to protect itself rather than the community it claimed to serve. Washington's first week delivering food provided a series of minor, but telling incidents that pointed toward a pattern of potential profiling. On 3 separate occasions, patrol cars followed him for several blocks when he entered affluent neighborhoods like Oakwood and Riverside Hills, only breaking off their pursuit when he clearly approached a house with delivery bag in pronoral hand. Twice residents questioned his presence, despite his clearly marked quick bite uniform and delivery bag, with one woman calling someone on her phone while watching him from her porch until he left the neighborhood. Washington's modified delivery app silently recorded each interaction, capturing GPS coordinates, timestamps, and audio that would later be analyzed for patterns. The first direct encounter came on Thursday evening, when Washington was delivering an order to a colonial-style home in Millfield's upscale Oakwood neighborhood. As he returned to his car, a patrol vehicle pulled up sharply, blocking him from leaving. Officer Kyle Peters, a young officer with barely concealed nervousness, approached with one hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Let me see some ID," he demanded without preamble. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area." Washington maintained his cover perfectly, showing appropriate concern but no undue resistance. "Is something wrong, officer? I'm just delivering food." He slowly reached for his wallet, presenting his delivery identification and driver's license. Officer Peters took both, returning to his patrol car where he ran Washington's license unnecessarily, keeping him waiting for 30 minutes while the food in his next delivery got cold. Other vehicles driven by white delivery drivers passed by without being stopped. The encounter ended without citation, but the message was clear: Washington didn't belong in this neighborhood, despite having legitimate business there. When Peters finally returned his ID, he offered no apology for the delay. "Keep moving and stick to your deliveries," he said, his tone implying a threat despite the innocuous words. Washington documented the entire interaction, noting it as the first direct evidence of discriminatory policing. As the days passed, Washington built rapport with local restaurant staff, particularly with Carmen Rodriguez at Sanchez Taqueria, a popular Mexican restaurant that used QuickBite for deliveries. Carmen, a talkative woman in her 30s, shared stories of other delivery drivers' encounters with police. "Our last guy quit after 2 months," she confided while Washington waited for an order. "Marcus was a good worker, always on time. Customers loved him. But the cops kept stopping him, especially in Oakwood. Made his deliveries late, ruined his customer ratings." She lowered her voice. "And he was black like you. The white drivers, never a problem." Through these conversations, Washington learned which areas and times experienced the most police harassment. He adjusted his delivery schedule to increase his presence during these high-activity periods, gathering more data while maintaining his cover. The restaurants became valuable intelligence sources, neutral ground, where workers from across the city shared experiences and warnings. During his second weekend in Millfield, Washington attended a community barbecue in a local park, an opportunity to establish his cover identity further while observing community dynamics. Standing by the grill with a plate of food, he overheard a group of young black men discussing their driving routes. "Never take Madison Avenue past the station," one advised. "Go 3 blocks out of your way if you have to." Another added, "And avoid the corner of Elm and Highland after 9. Hoffman's usually parked there, and he'll find a reason to stop you." A teenager in the group pulled out his phone, showing the others an app he'd created. "I marked all the spots where they like to wait," he explained. "Red pins for frequent stops, yellow for occasional. Share it with whoever needs it." Washington glanced at the screen, recognizing several intersections near predominantly black apartment complexes, including his own. The community had created their own intelligence network out of necessity, mapping the geography of discrimination in ways official complaint records never could. On Monday, Washington made his first delivery to the police station itself, bringing lunch to the administrative staff. This gave him the perfect opportunity to observe interactions and station layout while appearing to simply do his job. At the front desk, he noticed Officer Hoffman dismissively handling a black woman attempting to file a complaint, his tone condescending as he explained the proper procedures that seemed designed to discourage her. When she insisted on speaking to a supervisor, Hoffman claimed none were available, despite Washington clearly seeing a lieutenant in the office behind him. Moments later, a white couple entered to report a noise complaint, and Hoffman's demeanor transformed completely friendly, efficient, assuring them an officer would respond promptly. Washington completed the delivery and left making mental notes of the station layout, officer positions, and the clear disparity in service. After 2 weeks of careful observation, Washington had documented 27 instances of potential profiling, but needed stronger evidence to build a compelling case. During his scheduled check-in, Agent Rodriguez reviewed his findings in the secure communication system built into his delivery app. "You're gathering good baseline data," she noted, "but we need clear violations, documented patterns of differential treatment. This is promising, but not conclusive yet." Washington understood the challenge. "I think they're starting to recognize my vehicle. The same patrol cars seem to appear wherever I'm delivering now." Rodriguez advised patience. "That could work in our favor. If they're watching you, they'll eventually make a mistake. Just be careful not to break cover." That evening, Washington noticed the same unmarked police SUV passing his apartment building 3 times within 2 hours, far more than normal patrol patterns would justify. He couldn't be certain if it was routine surveillance or if his cover was suspected, but he followed protocol and varied his routes the next day, creating deliberate patterns to confuse any potential surveillance. The investigation was progressing, but Washington felt the pressure building. Every delivery could be the one that provided the critical evidence they needed, or the one that exposed his true identity. In the background of his mind, he heard Mrs. Jackson's warning. "They don't need a reason here." The statement encapsulated everything wrong with Millfield's policing, and Washington was determined to prove it wasn't just perception, but a systematic reality that could be documented, exposed, and ultimately changed. 3 weeks into the operation, Washington pulled into Lakeside Apartments, a primarily black housing community on Millfield's east side. The complex had seen better days, paint peeling from the buildings, cracked sidewalks, but well maintained by residents who took pride in their homes despite limited resources. Washington delivered a dinner order to apartment 14B, exchanging pleasant conversation with a young mother who thanked him for braving the rain that had started falling. As he returned to his car, splashing through puddles that reflected the streetlights, a patrol car swerved into the parking lot, cutting diagonally across empty spaces before coming to an abrupt stop that blocked Washington's vehicle. The aggressive arrival immediately set off warning signals in Washington's mind. This wasn't a routine stop, this was a deliberate intimidation tactic. Officer James Hoffman emerged from the driver's side, his partner Officer Sean Reynolds following more slowly from the passenger seat. Washington recognized Hoffman immediately from the department photos and Green's warnings. Up close, Hoffman was even more imposing, 6'2", with a boxer's build and cold eyes that seemed to be looking for any excuse to escalate the situation. "What are you doing around here?" Hoffman demanded, not bothering with any pretense of courtesy. His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon, a deliberate gesture meant to intimidate. Washington maintained his cover, activating the recording devices, concealed in his delivery bag and vehicle, with subtle movements that appeared natural. "Just finished a delivery, sir," he replied, keeping his tone respectful but not subservient. "I work for QuickBite." He gestured to his clearly marked uniform and the delivery bag in his hand. Hoffman scoffed, looking Washington up and down with undisguised contempt. "You don't look like any delivery person I've seen around here. What are you really doing? These apartments are known for drug activity." The racial undertone was unmistakable. Washington stood his ground, aware that every word was being recorded. "I've been working this job for 3 weeks now, sir. You can check my delivery app if you'd like." He slowly reached for his phone, careful to telegraph his movements. Hoffman stepped closer, deliberately invading Washington's personal space. "People like you always think you're so clever. I've been watching you driving all over town into neighborhoods where you don't belong." Reynolds, the younger officer, shifted uncomfortably behind Hoffman, but said nothing to contradict his superior. His expression suggested discomfort with the situation, but unwillingness to intervene. Washington remained calm, though internally his investigator's mind was cataloging every violation of protocol and potential civil rights infringement. "I go where the deliveries take me, officer. Just doing my job." Hoffman's expression darkened. "Who did you just deliver to? What did they order?" Washington hesitated, knowing that customer information was supposed to be private. "I'm not supposed to share customer details," Hoffman cut him off. "So you're refusing to cooperate with a police officer. What are you hiding?" The situation escalated when Hoffman spotted Washington's delivery bag in the car through the window. "What's in the bag? Open it up." Washington knew his rights and recognized the lack of probable cause. "May I ask why, sir? Do you have a reason to search my bag?" It was a reasonable question asked respectfully, but it visibly infuriated Hoffman, whose face flushed red. "I don't need a reason. I can smell something suspicious from here." It was a blatant lie. There was nothing illegal in the bag or the car, but Washington recognized it as a commonly used pretext for illegal searches. Reynolds, looking increasingly uncomfortable, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should just let him go, James. He's got other deliveries waiting." Hoffman silenced his partner with a glare before turning back to Washington. "Put your hands on the hood. Now." What followed was textbook police intimidation. Hoffman forced Washington against the vehicle, conducting a rough pat-down while continuing to make degrading comments. "You people are always causing trouble around here. Think you're above the law." Washington noticed several residents had begun recording the incident from their apartment windows. When he calmly mentioned this fact, Hoffman became even more aggressive, wrenching Washington's arms behind his back and handcuffing him with unnecessary force. "Now you're resisting arrest and disorderly conduct," Hoffman declared loudly, clearly playing to an audience that wasn't present, setting up his justification for the official report he would file later. Washington was placed in the back of the patrol car while the officers conducted an illegal search of his vehicle. They found nothing prohibited, of course, but Hoffman confiscated Washington's phone and the QuickBite delivery app tablet as evidence, though he specified no crime. Throughout the incident, Washington maintained his delivery driver persona, while ensuring his secondary recording devices captured every moment of the encounter. At the police station, Washington was kept handcuffed in an interview room for 3 hours, without being formally processed. Through the door, he could hear Hoffman discussing with another officer how to make the charges stick, and mentions of teaching these people to respect authority. The casual way they discussed fabricating evidence chilled Washington despite his years of experience investigating police misconduct. Eventually, a lieutenant reviewed the situation and, finding no actual evidence of any crime, released Washington with a warning that seemed more like a threat. Hoffman approached as Washington was gathering his belongings at the front desk. "I've got my eye on you now," he said quietly, close enough that only Washington could hear. "One wrong move, and you'll regret ever coming to Millfield." Once safely away from the station, Washington contacted Rodriguez using their secure protocol. They met at a predetermined location, where she retrieved the full recording of the encounter. The FBI team reviewed the footage with growing outrage at the clear civil rights violations. "This is exactly what we needed," Rodriguez said, "but it's also dangerous. Hoffman has marked you now. He'll be watching." Washington nodded his face, betraying the emotional toll of the experience despite his professional demeanor. "I've been black in America my whole life, Sophia. This isn't my first experience with officers like Hoffman." He rubbed his wrists where the handcuffs had left marks. "The difference is, this time I can actually do something about it." Washington returned to his apartment that night, the humiliation and injustice of the encounter weighing heavily despite knowing it would ultimately strengthen their case. No amount of FBI training or authority could fully shield him from the raw reality of being treated as less than human because of his skin color. As he documented the incident in detailed notes, Washington reflected on similar experiences throughout his life, being followed in stores, stopped while driving through white neighborhoods, questioned about belonging in professional spaces. The difference was that now he had the power and authority to hold the perpetrators accountable, something denied to most victims of such discrimination. Have you ever experienced or witnessed racial profiling by police officers? Comment number 1. If you believe this kind of systemic discrimination needs to be exposed and held accountable. Or number 2, if you think these are just isolated incidents blown out of proportion. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and accountability. What do you think will happen next? Will Washington's cover be blown, or will he gather enough evidence to bring down Hoffman and his corrupt colleagues? Keep watching to find out how deep this rabbit hole of corruption really goes. Washington intensified his investigation with renewed purpose after the confrontation with Hoffman. The incident had provided valuable evidence, but it also represented just one data point in what he suspected was a widespread pattern of discriminatory policing. Working from his apartment, he analyzed his own incident alongside historical complaints provided by Agent Rodriguez, spreading documents across his kitchen table and creating a digital map of incidents. A disturbing pattern emerged. Most civil rights violations occurred in specific patrol zones during Hoffman's shifts. Washington also discovered that complaints filed against Hoffman and 4 other officers routinely disappeared or were classified as resolved without action in department records. Using his law enforcement background, Washington recognized this as statistically improbable without deliberate interference. During the following days, Washington continued his delivery driver cover while conducting careful surveillance of officer movements. He identified key members of what appeared to be Hoffman's inner circle. Officers Reynolds and Michael Torres frequently patrolled with him, along with Sergeant William Parker, who seemed to coordinate their assignments. Washington noticed they concentrated their activities in specific neighborhoods, predominantly Black and Hispanic areas that bordered more affluent developments. They would conduct frequent stops for minor infractions like broken taillights or rolling stops, but these stops almost exclusively involved minority drivers. Washington befriended Jamal, another Black delivery driver, who worked primarily evening shifts. Over coffee at a local diner, Jamal shared his experiences of harassment. "Man, I got stopped 3 times last week, all for nothing. License plate light too dim. Suspected tinted windows. One time they said I fit a description." What description? Black man driving a car. Jamal showed Washington a backup camera he'd installed in his vehicle. "Started recording everything after they planted a baggie in my cousin's car last year. Charges got dropped when his lawyer demanded the body cam footage, which mysteriously didn't match the report." Jamal introduced Washington to a private social media group where local minorities shared warnings about police locations and documented encounters. Scrolling through the feed on Jamal's phone, Washington discovered dozens of unreported incidents. Many residents feared retaliation for filing formal complaints, instead warning each other through this underground network. The group had over 300 members, a significant portion of Millfield's minority population, and included detailed accounts of encounters with timestamps, officer names, and sometimes photos or videos. Washington carefully noted Officer Hoffman appeared in nearly 30% of the reported incidents. During a delivery to City Hall, Washington accidentally bumped into Diane Foster, a clerk in the police records department. Apologizing profusely, he helped her gather scattered papers, using the moment to strike up a conversation. Over the next week, he made several deliveries to City Hall, gradually building rapport with Diane. By his third visit, she recognized him, and they chatted while she signed for the delivery. "Must be busy in records with all the new hires at the police department," Washington commented casually. Diane laughed. "What new hires? Budget's been frozen for 2 years. We're actually down 3 officers from last year." Washington feigned surprise. "Really, I keep seeing new patrol cars in my neighborhood. Thought they were expanding." Diane lowered her voice. "That's just the Special Enforcement Initiative. Chief Evans redirected resources to high-priority areas. Same officers, different deployment." Through subsequent conversations, Washington learned a crucial procedural violation. Sergeant Parker reviewed all internal affairs complaints before filing, allowing him to intercept or modify accusations against certain officers. "It's not official policy," Diane explained during a lunch delivery, unaware of Washington's true identity. "But Parker insists on checking for completeness before anything gets filed. Between you and me, a lot of paperwork gets lost in that process." Washington's investigation took an unexpected turn when he discovered that Parker, Torres, and Hoffman had previously served together in another department that faced a federal investigation 5 years earlier. All 3 had transferred to Millfield before conclusions were reached, effectively escaping scrutiny. This couldn't be coincidence. Further research revealed that Chief Bennett Evans had received substantial donations for his planned mayoral campaign from local business leaders, particularly Victor Maxwell, a real estate developer whose company had been buying properties throughout Millfield's minority neighborhoods. The investigation deepened when Washington delivered food to a late-night meeting at the Millfield Grill's private dining room. The order had been placed by Maxwell Development Company, giving Washington legitimate access to the restaurant's back hallway. As he approached with the food, Washington positioned himself to overhear fragments of conversation through the partially open door. Inside, he glimpsed Hoffman, Parker, Torres, and several local business leaders, including Maxwell himself, a tall, silver-haired man whose company logo appeared on construction sites throughout the city. Washington couldn't hear everything, but phrases like property values, neighborhood standards, and enforcement priorities stood out clearly. One voice he recognized as Maxwell stated, "The North Side is almost ready for Phase 2. We need to accelerate the timetable on Westridge." Hoffman responded, "We can increase patrols, generate some statistical support for your council presentation." The meeting had no official record in any municipal calendar, but appeared to directly influence police patrol patterns. Washington documented everything he observed, recognizing the potential connection between discriminatory policing and economic interests. 3 days later, Washington connected with Mrs. Jackson's grandson, Andre, a 24-year-old graduate student who had recently been arrested by Hoffman on questionable drug possession charges. Meeting at a coffee shop far from Westridge, Andre revealed that the dashcam had mysteriously malfunctioned during his arrest. "They said they found weed in my car, but I don't even smoke," Andre explained, his voice low. "My lawyer tried to get the evidence, but they claimed it was destroyed during testing. Then things got weird. The DA offered to drop all charges if I agreed to move out of my grandmother's building within 30 days. Washington kept his expression neutral, despite his shock. "Why would they care where you live?" Andre leaned forward. "Grandma's building is the last one on the block, not owned by Maxwell Development. They've been trying to buy it for years, but the Tenants Association won't sell. After my arrest, 3 other residents got similar deals. Charges dropped if they moved. Can't be coincidence." Washington agreed carefully, keeping his FBI background concealed while gathering crucial testimony. As he compiled evidence, Washington noticed increased patrol activity around his apartment and began to suspect his cover might be compromised. Unmarked police vehicles appeared more frequently, and on 2 occasions he observed officers photographing his car from a distance. During their secure check-in, Rodriguez warned him to be extremely careful. The pattern you're uncovering suggests something bigger than individual officer misconduct. If this connects to real estate development and political ambitions, we're dealing with a potentially wide-reaching conspiracy. These people have resources and influence. Washington nodded, understanding the implications. What had begun as an investigation into racial profiling was expanding into something far more complex, a possible conspiracy involving police, business interests, and local government, all working together to systematically remove black residents from valuable real estate. The racial discrimination wasn't just bigotry. It was a tool being used for financial gain and political advancement. As he ended the meeting with Rodriguez, Washington felt the weight of responsibility increasing. The investigation had become more dangerous, but also more important than ever. People's homes, livelihoods, and fundamental rights were at stake. The question now wasn't just whether he could document discrimination, but whether he could unravel the entire web of corruption before his cover was blown. Washington and the FBI team identified a troubling financial pattern that connected all the elements of their investigation. After analyzing property records and police enforcement data, they discovered that property values decreased significantly after periods of targeted enforcement in black neighborhoods. These devalued properties were then purchased by Maxwell Development Company, which renovated them minimally before reselling at substantial profit as revitalized urban spaces. The pattern was clear, aggressive policing created conditions that drove down property values and pressured residents to sell, allowing Maxwell's company to acquire buildings below market value. More disturbing still, Washington uncovered evidence that several officers, including Chief Evans, had investment ties to these developments through shell companies. The financial relationships were deliberately obscured, but traceable through corporate records when you knew where to look. Increasingly suspicious of being watched, Washington varied his delivery routines and created deliberate patterns to draw attention away from his real investigative activities. He took circuitous routes between deliveries, sometimes doubling back or making unnecessary stops to confuse anyone tracking his movements. Despite these precautions, during a delivery to Oakwood, Washington noticed Officer Torres in an unmarked car photographing his license plate from across the street. The officer quickly drove away when Washington looked in his direction, confirming his suspicions that the department was actively investigating him. Washington maintained his cover, but immediately contacted Rodriguez to prepare contingency plans. They're running deep background checks by now, Rodriguez warned during their secure communication. Your cover identity will hold up to standard scrutiny, but if they have connections in state agencies, they might find inconsistencies. Washington understood the implications. We need to accelerate the timeline. How soon can we move on? What we have, Rodriguez hesitated. The evidence is compelling but still circumstantial. We need something that directly connects the discriminatory policing to the real estate scheme and proves official involvement. The next morning, Washington was delivering breakfast to a downtown office when he was pulled over by a patrol car. Hoffman sat behind the wheel with Reynolds in the passenger seat. Unlike their previous encounter, both officers had their body cameras conspicuously activated, the small red lights indicating recording in progress. Hoffman approached with exaggerated professionalism, a performance clearly meant for the camera. "Good morning, sir. License and registration, please." His tone was neutral, but still carried an undertone of condescension. Washington provided the requested documents, noting the stark difference from their last interaction. Hoffman examined the license carefully. "Mr. Washington, are you aware your left brake light is intermittently malfunctioning?" It was a fabrication. Washington had checked all vehicle functions that morning as part of his security protocol, but he played along. "No, officer, I wasn't aware. Thank you for letting me know." Hoffman returned his documents with mechanical courtesy. "Consider this a verbal warning. Get that light fixed as soon as possible." As Hoffman walked away, he added just loudly enough for Washington to hear, "We'll be seeing each other again soon." The encounter lasted less than 5 minutes. but Washington recognized it as significant. The performance for the camera, the fabricated violation, the subtle threat Hoffman was building an official record that contradicted his actual behavior, creating plausible deniability for any accusations of harassment. After completing his morning deliveries, Washington discovered his QuickBite account had been flagged for customer complaints, though no specifics were provided. The app restricted his delivery area to the lower-income neighborhoods, effectively blocking access to the affluent areas where he had observed most of the suspicious police activity. When he contacted QuickBite support, they cited routine service area adjustments and refused to provide further details. Washington suspected police interference but couldn't prove it without exposing his investigation. The restaurant owners he'd built relationships with mentioned police officers asking questions about him. Carmen at Sanchez Taqueria pulled him aside when he picked up an order. "2 officers came by yesterday asking about you," she whispered. "Wanted to know how long you'd worked here, if you ever said anything strange, if you took pictures, or asked unusual questions. I told them you were just a normal delivery guy, but be careful, Terrell." Washington thanked her for the warning while recognizing another sign that his cover was being systematically attacked. The next day, he learned that Carmen's cousin had been arrested by Hoffman on drug charges that appeared fabricated based on the timing and circumstances. The young man had no prior record and was a college student with a scholarship. The timing suggested intimidation related to Washington's frequent visits to the restaurant. Washington felt responsible for putting others at risk through their association with him, a common hazard of undercover work that never became easier to bear. Returning to his apartment that evening, Washington noticed something that sent a chill through him, a small black device mounted near his building's entrance that hadn't been there that morning. Using counter-surveillance techniques from his FBI training, he continued normally while surreptitiously examining the device without approaching it directly. It appeared to be a wireless camera, with motion detection capabilities positioned to capture everyone entering or leaving the building. Washington couldn't determine if it was police surveillance or FBI protection without risking exposure. He maintained his cover while communicating with Rodriguez through their prearranged signals, leaving a specific takeout menu in his window to request urgent contact. Within an hour, Rodriguez confirmed through secure channels that the FBI hadn't installed any surveillance at his building, meaning Washington was under police observation. The situation reached a critical point when Washington received an unusual delivery request through his app, an order to be delivered to an address in an abandoned warehouse district at the edge of town. The request came with a substantial tip, making it appear legitimate, but the location raised immediate red flags. Washington recognized a potential trap, but also an opportunity. After consulting with Rodriguez, who advised against going, Washington proposed a compromise. "If I don't show, they'll know something's off. No regular delivery driver would turn down a $40 tip, but we can use this to our advantage." Rodriguez reluctantly agreed, but insisted on additional precautions. She equipped Washington with enhanced recording devices and positioned FBI surveillance around the delivery location. When Washington arrived at the warehouse, he found Officer Torres waiting alone, leaning against an unmarked police car. Washington approached cautiously, delivery bag in hand, every sense alert for danger. To his surprise, Torres seemed nervous rather than threatening. "There's no food order," Torres said, glancing around as though concerned about being observed. "I needed to talk to you without others knowing." Washington maintained his cover. "What's this about, officer? I'm just trying to do my job." Torres lowered his voice. "I know what Hoffman's been doing to you. It's not right. Some of us don't agree with how things are being run, but speaking up isn't an option if you want to keep your job or stay safe." Washington remained cautious, suspecting another trap, but Torres continued. "Tomorrow night, Hoffman, Chief Evans, and Maxwell are meeting at the Oak Ridge Country Club private dining room. Maxwell's finalizing purchases of 6 properties in Westridge, where owners were pressured to sell through selective enforcement. They're calling it the Neighborhood Renewal Initiative, but it's nothing but legalized theft." Before Washington could respond, Torres received a call on his radio. His expression changed to alarm. "I have to go. Forget this happened." He quickly returned to his vehicle and drove away, leaving Washington with crucial information but uncertain of its reliability. Was Torres genuinely opposed to the corruption, or was this an elaborate setup to test Washington's true identity? The evidence suggested divided loyalties within the department, with some officers uncomfortable with Hoffman's methods, but afraid to speak out. As Washington reported the encounter to Rodriguez, the FBI team prepared for multiple scenarios. If Torres's information was legitimate, it could provide the direct connection between policing and real estate development they needed. If it was a trap, Washington's cover and possibly his safety was at risk. The investigation had reached its most dangerous and critical phase. Washington knew that the next 24 hours would likely determine whether justice would be served or whether a corrupt system would claim another victim. As he prepared for the next day's operations, Washington thought about all the people counting on him, Mrs. Jackson Andre Carmen, and her cousin and countless others who had suffered under Millfield's discriminatory policing. Their stories strengthened his resolve to see the investigation through, regardless of personal risk. Washington approached the investigation of Torres's information with meticulous caution, unwilling to reveal his true identity, but determined to verify the alleged meeting. The Oak Ridge Country Club was in the most exclusive part of Millfield, a sprawling complex of manicured lawns and colonial architecture that catered to the city's elite. Rather than attempting direct surveillance, Washington arranged a legitimate delivery to the clubhouse restaurant, which shared the same parking lot as the country club's main building. Positioned at the service entrance while waiting for the order, Washington had clear sightline to the private dining room entrance. As predicted, Chief Evans arrived first, followed separately by Maxwell and several other men in expensive suits. 20 minutes later, Hoffman entered through a side door, attempting discretion but clearly visible from Washington's vantage point. The gathering confirmed Torres's information was accurate, lending credibility to his apparent break with Hoffman's faction. Using specialized FBI equipment provided by Rodriguez earlier that day, Washington positioned a directional microphone disguised as a smartphone, capturing audio fragments from an open window near the private dining room. The technology wasn't perfect. Background noise and distance created gaps in the recording, but what came through was damning. Maxwell's distinctive voice discussed accelerated acquisition timelines and enforcement-supported property transitions. Chief Evans responded with assurances about maintaining appropriate patrol presence in target zones. Most incriminating was Hoffman's detailed explanation of how increased citations and arrests could create documentation of neighborhood decline needed for rezoning applications. The recording established a direct connection between discriminatory policing and Maxwell's development plans, confirming what Washington had suspected from the beginning. The conspiracy was even more calculated than they had imagined. After the recording was secured, Washington returned to his investigation headquarters to analyze the data with Rodriguez. Together, they uncovered a hidden pattern in arrest records. Black residents who refused to sell their homes to Maxwell's company faced disproportionate police attention, often resulting in arrests for minor or fabricated violations. In the past 18 months, 26 homeowners who declined Maxwell's initial offers subsequently faced legal troubles, from drug charges to code violations that created financial pressure to sell. The evidence painted a picture of policing weaponized for corporate profit, with racial discrimination as the preferred tool. The investigation expanded when Washington identified a second group of officers who appeared uncomfortable with these tactics. Officer Reynolds, initially seen as part of Hoffman's circle, showed signs of conflicted loyalty. During a traffic stop, Washington witnessed while delivering nearby. Reynolds pulled over a young black motorist for an alleged rolling stop. When Hoffman wasn't present, Reynolds approached the driver's window and, after checking for active cameras, turned off his body camera before speaking. "Look, just be careful around here, especially after dark," Reynolds advised the surprised driver. "Some officers are looking for any reason to make stops in this neighborhood right now. Keep your registration current and all your lights working." Reynolds then returned to his patrol car, reactivated his camera, and issued only a verbal warning. This suggested internal divisions within the department that could potentially be leveraged. While making a delivery to the courthouse, Washington used his law enforcement background to access public records in the clerk's office. Posing as a researcher gathering statistics for a community college project, he reviewed case outcomes and discovered a Judge Harold Mercer with unusually high conviction rates for cases brought by Hoffman and consistently low bail requirements for Maxwell's company when faced with housing violations. The judicial component completed the picture of institutional corruption. Washington's cover faced its greatest threat when he delivered food to a police charity event at the Millfield Community Center. Face to face with numerous officers, including some who had harassed him previously, he maintained his delivery persona with remarkable composure. The room was filled with local political figures, business leaders, and officers in dress uniforms rather than patrol gear. Washington kept his head down, focusing on setting up the catering table, while gathering intelligence through careful observation and enhanced listening devices concealed in his uniform. During this high-risk operation, he overheard a conversation between Hoffman and Torres near the buffet table. Hoffman, unaware of Torres's meeting with Washington, mentioned plans to handle the delivery guy situation permanently. The ominous statement was followed by discussion of planting something solid that would keep him occupied for a few years. Torres appeared to agree, but later positioned himself near Washington and whispered, "They're planning something for tomorrow night. Don't go home." The warning sent Washington into emergency protocols. That evening, Mrs. Jackson reported officers questioning residents about Washington's comings and goings. "They were asking when you leave for work, when you come home, if you have visitors," she told him worriedly. "I didn't tell them anything useful, but others might have." That night, from a carefully concealed position, Washington observed Hoffman and Torres conducting surveillance on his apartment building. Using counter-surveillance techniques, Washington executed a prepared emergency protocol, creating the appearance of normal activities inside his apartment using timed lights and a television on a timer, while secretly relocating to a secure location established by Rodriguez. From this safe position, Washington reviewed all evidence collected over the investigation and identified the full scope of the corruption, a coordinated effort between police leadership, business interests, and local government to systematically drive out black residents for profit using discriminatory policing as their primary tool. The conspiracy involved at least 7 officers, 3 local officials, Maxwell's development company, and potentially Judge Mercer, whose rulings facilitated the scheme. The evidence included financial records showing property transfers, statistical analysis of enforcement patterns, audio recordings of planning meetings, and testimony from victims of fabricated charges. Rodriguez arrived at the safe house with news that the FBI director had approved the final phase of the operation based on their compelling evidence. "We have enough to move forward with federal charges," she explained. "Civil rights violations, conspiracy evidence tampering, extortion, they'll face serious consequences. But to make the strongest case, we need to document one more direct attempt at misconduct." Washington understood what this meant. He would need to break his cover in a controlled manner, allowing Hoffman to incriminate himself while federal agents gathered the final evidence. The risk was significant, but the potential impact made it worthwhile. "I've spent my career investigating officers who abuse their authority," Washington said, reviewing photographs of families who had lost their homes to Maxwell's scheme. "But this is different. This is systematic exploitation of an entire community using racial bias as a business model." As they prepared for the final phase, Washington thought about all the people who had suffered under this system. People who couldn't simply walk away from their undercover identity when the case concluded. For Mrs. Jackson, Andre Jamal Carmen, and her cousin, this was their daily reality. The thought strengthened his resolve to see the case through to its conclusion regardless of personal risk. Do you believe systemic racism exists in law enforcement, or are these just isolated incidents caused by a few bad officers? Comment number 1. If you think we need more undercover investigations like Washington's to expose corruption. Or number 2, if you believe internal police oversight is sufficient. If you're finding this story as shocking as I did, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more exposés of injustice and corruption. As Washington prepares for the most dangerous phase of his operation, what do you think will happen? Will Hoffman and his corrupt network discover Washington's true identity before justice can be served, or will Washington successfully bring down the entire corrupt system? Stay tuned to find out how this high-stakes undercover operation concludes. The FBI team developed an intricate plan to expose the entire network, transforming what had begun as a targeted investigation into a comprehensive operation to dismantle systemic corruption. Washington would allow himself to be caught documenting police activities, provoking a response that would reveal the department's true operations under circumstances the FBI could fully monitor and record. Rodriguez established multiple surveillance points throughout Millfield and prepared emergency response teams positioned strategically to intervene if Washington faced immediate danger. The plan required precise timing and Washington's willingness to place himself directly in harm's way. "We need to provoke them into showing their true colors," Washington explained during the final briefing. "If they believe they've caught me gathering evidence against them, their response will likely involve the same intimidation and evidence manipulation they've used against residents." The next morning, Washington deliberately delivered to locations where Hoffman regularly patrolled, carrying visibly suspicious equipment in his delivery bag, a camera with telephoto lens positioned to be partially visible notebook with MPD, patrol patterns written on the cover, and printed maps with highlighted routes corresponding to Hoffman's regular patrol areas. The provocative materials were carefully designed to suggest Washington was documenting police activities for an activist or watchdog group, but not sophisticated enough to suggest law enforcement involvement. As anticipated, Hoffman's patrol car appeared within 2 hours following Washington through 3 deliveries before activating lights and siren when Washington parked outside a coffee shop on Westridge Avenue. Torres rode in the passenger seat, his expression unreadable as they approached. Washington exited his vehicle with practiced casualness, maintaining his delivery driver persona while ensuring all recording devices were active. "Problem, officers?" he asked, knowing exactly what was about to unfold. Hoffman's face showed barely contained satisfaction as he ordered Washington to step away from his vehicle. "We've received reports of suspicious activity involving your vehicle. I need to see some identification." Without waiting for Washington to comply, Hoffman moved to look through the car window, spotting the planted evidence in the delivery bag on the passenger seat. "What do we have here?" he demanded, his voice rising with manufactured outrage. "Looks like surveillance equipment to me." "You've been following police officers taking pictures." Washington maintained a careful balance between compliance and subtle resistance, allowing Hoffman to escalate the situation naturally. "That's my personal camera. I'm a photography enthusiast." Hoffman's expression darkened. "Photography enthusiast, with maps marking police patrol routes. Step back from the vehicle now." The confrontation escalated dramatically, with Hoffman becoming physically aggressive and making explicitly racist threats, believing all recording devices had been confiscated. "You people think you can come into our city and cause trouble. I told you what would happen if you didn't learn your lesson." He shoved Washington against the patrol car while conducting an unnecessarily rough search. Torres appeared conflicted, but followed orders, securing Washington's hands behind his back with handcuffs. Throughout the arrest, Hoffman made incriminating statements about teaching troublemakers a lesson and how Washington would regret sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. Bystanders began recording the incident on their phones, creating additional independent documentation. At the police station, Washington was brought to an interrogation room where Hoffman, now joined by Sergeant Parker, attempted to intimidate him. The room was deliberately chosen a secondary interview space without the standard recording equipment of the main interrogation rooms. Parker closed the door, creating an atmosphere of isolation and vulnerability. "So you're the one who's been causing trouble in my town," Parker began, his tone conversational but threaded with menace. "Seems like you've been very interested in our patrol patterns, our officers. Want to tell us who you're working for?" Washington maintained his cover, showing appropriate concern but not panic. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a delivery driver. The camera is for a photography class I'm taking." Hoffman slammed his hand on the table. "Cut the crap. We found the maps, the notes. You're documenting police movements." What are you, some kind of cop-watching activist? Working for one of those Black Lives Matter groups, Washington remained silent, allowing their assumptions to guide the interrogation. Parker adopted a more reasonable tone, playing good cop to Hoffman's aggression. Look, we can make this easy. Tell us who you're reporting to and all these charges disappear. You leave town today, we forget this happened. The offer revealed their pattern of driving out undesirables through intimidation and selective enforcement. It was exactly the type of evidence Washington had been working to document. The situation took an unexpected turn when Officer Reynolds entered, appearing to join the interrogation but subtly signaling something was wrong. He positioned himself by the door, effectively blocking anyone from entering without warning. Chief Evans wants updates on this situation, Reynolds mentioned casually. Says it's getting attention upstairs. The reference to upstairs suggested higher involvement than previously known, potentially, including the mayor's office or other municipal leadership. Washington maintained his delivery driver cover while carefully documenting procedural violations. His rights were systematically ignored. No phone call allowed, no formal booking process initiated, and the interview intentionally not recorded. The officers discussed how to handle him without creating another incident, revealing previous cases of misconduct that had apparently caused problems for the department. During the interrogation, Washington subtly tested Hoffman's reaction to certain names and locations, confirming connections between specific enforcement actions and Maxwell's property acquisitions. When Washington casually mentioned increased patrols around lakeside apartments, Hoffman responded with unguarded frustration. Those people had their chance. Maxwell offered fair market value. Not our fault if they need extra convincing to make the smart choice. Parker shot Hoffman a warning look, but the damage was done. Hoffman had directly connected enforcement actions to Maxwell's business interests. The interrogation was interrupted when Torres received an urgent call and stepped outside the room. Washington, using the enhanced listening training from his FBI background, overheard fragments of conversation suggesting another FBI investigator may have been discovered. Second surveillance team on Oakwood. Definitely federal. Have to assume compromise. The information was concerning this wasn't part of their planned operation, indicating either a serious security breach or a clever deception by the officers to test Washington's reaction. Believing they had intimidated Washington sufficiently, Hoffman returned with fabricated paperwork, claiming Washington had consented to a vehicle search where they found a small bag of what appeared to be cocaine hidden under the prosset. Driver's seat. "Look what we found in your car," Hoffman announced with satisfaction. "Possession with intent to distribute given the amount. That's 5 to 10 years minimum." Washington recognized this moment as their critical mistake. Planting evidence elevated the case from civil rights violations to felony evidence tampering and conspiracy federal crimes that would significantly strengthen the prosecution's case. Parker seemed to realize they had crossed a line. "Maybe we should process him formally now," he suggested, eyeing the fabricated evidence with visible discomfort. As the officers prepared to formally book him on falsified charges, Washington made his move. "Before we continue," he said calmly, "I think there's something you should know." He reached down to his sock, where a specialized FBI credential holder had been concealed throughout his undercover assignment. The officers tensed hands, moving toward weapons, until Washington slowly extracted the credentials and placed them on the table. "Special Agent Terrell Washington, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Office of Professional Responsibility. You're all subjects of an official investigation into civil rights violations, corruption, and now evidence tampering." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Hoffman's face drained of color. Parker froze in disbelief, and Torres took an involuntary step backward. Reynolds, interestingly, showed no surprise, suggesting he may have suspected Washington's true identity. "Everything, since my arrest, has been transmitted live to the FBI field office," Washington continued, revealing the multiple recording devices that had remained active despite the officers' search. "Including your discussion about planting evidence and your connection to Maxwell Development's property acquisitions." Hoffman's shock transformed into rage. "You're lying. This is entrapment." "You can't." Washington cut him off. "This isn't entrapment, Officer Hoffman. This is accountability, and right about now my colleagues should be executing warrants throughout Millfield. Your department's systematic discrimination and corruption are being exposed as we speak." As if on cue, commotion erupted in the main station area, raised voices, doors opening, the unmistakable sound of federal agents, identifying themselves. Washington stood straightening his posture as he fully embodied his true identity for the first time in weeks. "Gentlemen, this interview is over. And so is your career of using the badge to terrorize the people you swore to protect." The revelation of Washington's identity triggered immediate chaos within the department. Hoffman's face contorted with a mixture of rage and panic as he struggled to process the implications. "This is bullshit," he sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. "You can't just come in here," and Parker interrupted his tactical mind, already calculating damage control options. "James, shut up," he hissed before turning to Washington with a forced professional smile. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding, Agent Washington. If there were any procedural violations during your visit to our city, I assure you they were isolated incidents that don't reflect department policy." Washington remained silent, allowing Parker's desperate attempt at damage limitation to hang in the air unanswered. Torres stood frozen by the door, understanding the magnitude of what was happening. His eyes darted between Washington and his fellow officers, weighing loyalties and self-preservation. Reynolds quietly distanced himself from the others, moving to the corner of the room with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The station's main entrance doors burst open as FBI teams led by Agent Rodriguez entered, executing warrants for records, communications, and electronic devices. "FBI, we have federal warrants for records and evidence. Do not attempt to access any computers or phones. Step away from your workstations now," Rodriguez's commanding voice carried throughout the building, followed by the systematic deployment of agents to secure evidence and prevent destruction of records. The operation expanded simultaneously across Millfield, teams executing warrants at Maxwell's offices, Judge Mercer's chambers, and several other locations connected to the conspiracy. Washington, now operating openly as an FBI agent, directed evidence collection with practiced efficiency. "Focus on electronic records first," he instructed the technical team. "Server access email archives, body camera footage archives, and I want all property records involving Maxwell development for the past 5 years." The scale of corruption became increasingly clear as documents revealed systematic targeting of black neighborhoods. Agents discovered spreadsheets correlating increased patrol assignments with property devaluation, targets falsified, crime statistics used to justify aggressive enforcement, and financial connections between department leadership and development companies. Most damning were email exchanges between Chief Evans and Maxwell discussing specific properties and the enforcement resources needed to encourage sales. As the operation progressed, Officer Torres approached Rodriguez, offering information in exchange for consideration. "I want to cooperate," he said quietly. "I've been uncomfortable with this situation for months, but speaking up wasn't an option if I wanted to stay employed or safe." His testimony revealed that officers who questioned department practices faced retaliation, undesirable shifts, dangerous assignments, without backup or fabricated internal affairs complaints. The atmosphere in the station transformed from stunned silence to frantic activity as officers realized the extent of the investigation. Some attempted to distance themselves from Hoffman and Parker, claiming ignorance of the broader conspiracy. Others sat in shocked silence, careers and futures visibly crumbling before their eyes. Chief Evans arrived 40 minutes into the operation, striding into the station with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. His expression faltered momentarily at the sight of FBI agents at officer desks, systematically downloading records and securing evidence. Recovering quickly, he approached Washington with an outstretched hand and political smile. "Agent Washington, I understand there's been some confusion today. I assure you, if any of my officers have conducted themselves inappropriately, I want to know about it. My department is committed to transparency and accountability." Washington ignored the offered hand. "Chief Evans, we have evidence of your direct involvement in coordinating discriminatory enforcement to depress property values for Maxwell Development's benefit. We have the emails, the financial records and testimony from your officers." He gestured to a nearby agent. "This officer will escort you to interview room 1, where you'll be formally advised of your rights and the charges being considered." Evans's political mask slipped, revealing flash of anger quickly suppressed. "This is a misunderstanding. I've always maintained the highest standards in this department." Even as he attempted to project innocence, Evans's eyes darted to his office, where agents were removing his computer and files. Washington turned away, focusing on the broader operation as Evans was escorted to the interview room, already calculating which subordinates he could sacrifice to save himself. The investigation expanded beyond the police department as documents revealed broader involvement throughout local government. Council members Samuel Grant and Teresa Wilkins had facilitated zoning changes following targeted enforcement receiving campaign contributions and personal loans from Maxwell's company. Deputy Mayor Richard Coleman had helped fast-track building permits and inspections for Maxwell while delaying approvals for competing developers. Washington discovered that his initial assignment had only uncovered the surface of a years-long operation that had displaced hundreds of families through coordinated harassment. What he had first investigated as racial profiling had revealed itself as something even more insidious: the weaponization of law enforcement for corporate profit and political advancement with racism as its primary tool. As the day progressed, Officer Reynolds approached Washington privately in a moment between evidence collection tasks. "I've been documenting this for months," he admitted, handing over a flash drive concealed in his uniform pocket. "Started keeping records after they pressured Mrs. Wilson off her property, 75-year-old woman who'd lived there 40 years. Planted evidence cited her for code violations that didn't exist, arrested her grandson on fabricated charges. I knew it was wrong, but coming forward." He trailed off. The last officer who filed a complaint against Hoffman ended up with drugs in his locker during an anonymous tip inspection. Reynolds's evidence provided crucial historical context and identified additional victims and conspirators. His documentation included patrol assignments that correlated perfectly with Maxwell's acquisition targets, internal communications about problem residents, and a list of officers who had been pushed out after questioning department practices. By evening, the scope of the conspiracy had become clear. Washington stood in the department's conference room, now converted to the FBI's temporary command center, surrounded by evidence boards and computer stations. "We've identified 3 distinct components of the operation," he explained to the assembled federal team. "First, the enforcement arm Hoffman-Parker, and at least 5 other officers who executed the discriminatory policing. Second, the administrative component Chief Evans and 3 department administrators who directed resources, buried complaints, and falsified statistics to support the operation. Third, the financial beneficiaries Maxwell Development and their political enablers who profited from the artificially depressed property values." Rodriguez nodded, examining the relationship maps agents had constructed. "The pattern is consistent across 4 neighborhoods over 6 years. They started with Riverside in 2018, then moved to Eastwood, Jefferson Park, and now Westridge. In each case, the same sequence: increased patrols and citations, rising arrest rates, declining property values, followed by bulk purchases by Maxwell through shell companies." The investigation had transformed from exposing racial profiling to documenting a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had systematically exploited racial bias for financial gain. As the operation continued into the night, Hoffman made a desperate attempt to delete evidence using his phone to remotely access the department's server despite direct orders not to use electronic devices. The attempt was immediately flagged by FBI monitoring software, leading to additional obstruction charges. During his formal arrest, Hoffman's facade finally cracked completely. "You think this changes anything?" he spat as agents secured his hands with zip ties. "People like you don't belong in neighborhoods like Oakwood. We were just maintaining standards, keeping property values protected. That's what people really want, they just can't say it out loud anymore." His unguarded comments revealed the deeply held racist beliefs that had made him a perfect instrument for the conspiracy, confirming the discriminatory intent behind the enforcement patterns. Washington reconnected with community members who had provided initial information, including Marcus Green and affected residents. Their testimonies transformed from isolated complaints into a compelling pattern of civil rights violations that strengthened the federal case. Mrs. Jackson arrived at the community center where FBI agents had set up a public intake station carrying a weathered accordion file. "Been keeping records for 20 years, she explained, opening the file to reveal meticulously documented police interactions, dates, times, officer names, witness accounts. Nobody ever believed us before. Thought we were exaggerating or playing the race card." Similar stories emerged throughout the day, residents who had documented their experiences out of frustration and hoped that someday someone would listen. These community records, combined with the department's own documentation and the FBI investigation, created an overwhelming body of evidence that would be nearly impossible to dismiss. As the day concluded, Washington called his wife Ayanna from a quiet corner of the command center. "It's bigger than we thought," he explained, exhaustion evident in his voice. "Systematic exploitation of an entire community, using police power to generate profit from people's suffering." Ayanna's response surprised him. "I know. My firm has been quietly gathering civil cases against Millfield PD for the past year. We were planning to file a class action next month." The coincidence made Washington laugh for the first time in days. "So while I was investigating from the inside, you were building the case from the outside. The synchronicity between criminal and civil proceedings would create perfect complementary pressure on the corrupt system approaching justice from the outside. Multiple angles simultaneously. That's why we make a good team," Ayanna replied. "They never stood a chance." As Washington ended the call, he looked around the police station that had been the center of so much injustice, now transformed into a hub of accountability. The investigation had exposed not just individual acts of misconduct, but an entire system designed to profit from discrimination. The road ahead would be long prosecutions, testimony reforms, but for the first time in generations, the residents of Millfield's black neighborhoods could see a path toward genuine justice and equal protection under the law. 6 months after the dramatic raid on Millfield Police Department, Washington sat in a federal courthouse preparing to testify before a grand jury. The investigation had grown into one of the most extensive police corruption cases in recent history, revealing layers of misconduct that extended far beyond racial profiling. Washington adjusted his tie, reviewing his notes one final time before entering the grand jury room. The evidence he presented was comprehensive and damning: thousands of pages of documentation, audio recordings, financial records, and testimony from both victims and cooperating officers. The pattern was consistent and deliberate, Washington explained to the attentive jurors. Minority neighborhoods were targeted for aggressive enforcement, creating conditions that depressed property values. Once values dropped sufficiently, Maxwell Development would acquire properties below market value, often through shell companies, to disguise the pattern. After renovation, these properties would be marketed to affluent buyers at substantial profit. Washington methodically connected each element of the conspiracy, demonstrating how the discriminatory policing served financial interests while devastating the affected communities. This wasn't just bias or individual misconduct. It was a systematic enterprise designed to weaponize law enforcement for private gain. The grand jury deliberations were swift. Indictments were issued against 17 officers, including Hoffman Parker and Chief Evans, for civil rights violations, conspiracy evidence, tampering, and extortion. Maxwell and 3 other developers faced charges for conspiracy fraud and racketeering. 5 local government officials either resigned or faced charges for their involvement in facilitating the scheme. The case made national headlines, with major networks and publications covering what prosecutors described as one of the most egregious abuses of police power documented in the past 20 years. The story became a flashpoint in ongoing national conversations about race policing and economic justice. Officer Reynolds received immunity for his cooperation and was appointed to work with Janet Williams, a respected former federal prosecutor brought in as reform commissioner to rebuild the department. Reynolds's insider knowledge proved invaluable in identifying problematic policies and officers who had enabled the corruption even if they weren't directly involved. Torres accepted a plea deal requiring his full testimony against the leadership in exchange for reduced charges. His cooperation helped prosecutors establish the timeline of how the conspiracy had evolved from isolated instances of discrimination into a coordinated system of exploitation. The Millfield Police Department underwent complete restructuring with federal oversight. New hiring practices, training protocols, and accountability mechanisms were implemented. Body cameras became mandatory, with footage automatically uploaded to secure servers outside department control. Community oversight boards with actual authority to investigate complaints were established, giving residents a meaningful voice in policing practices for the first time. Washington received commendations within the FBI, but maintained a low public profile, concerned about potential retaliation against his family. His successful investigation led to the creation of a specialized FBI unit focused on identifying similar patterns of discriminatory policing nationwide, with particular attention to cases where economic interests might be driving enforcement decisions. Washington was offered leadership of this new unit, recognition of his unique skills in uncovering complex intersections of racial discrimination and financial corruption. The community experienced meaningful change, as civil settlements provided restitution to affected residents. A judge ordered that properties acquired through the scheme be placed in a community trust, allowing displaced residents the opportunity to return if they wished. Others received financial compensation that acknowledged both economic and emotional damages from years of targeted harassment. New affordable housing initiatives ensured diversity would be maintained even as neighborhoods improved. In a private ceremony, away from media attention, community leaders, including Marcus Green and Mrs. Jackson, thanked Washington for his courage and persistence. Mrs. Jackson revealed that her meticulous documentation of police harassment over decades had provided some of the most compelling evidence for the pattern of discrimination. "Started keeping records after they beat my husband in 1982, she explained. "Never thought I'd live to see the day when someone would actually use them." Her grandson Andre had his record expunged and received a settlement, enabling him to complete his education without the financial burden of student loans. "Planning to go to law school now," he told Washington. "Figure we need more people who understand both sides of the system." Carmen's cousin and others wrongfully arrested during the investigation had their cases dismissed and records cleared. The social media group that had documented police harassment transformed into a formal community oversight organization, working collaboratively with the Reform Department. Their documentation methods, developed out of necessity and self-preservation, became a model for community-based accountability systems adopted in other cities facing similar challenges. The FBI identified similar patterns in 3 other jurisdictions, suggesting the Millfield case had exposed a broader national issue of policing being misused for gentrification and financial gain. Washington's investigation became a template for identifying these complex conspiracies that existed at the intersection of race policing and economic development. What makes these cases particularly difficult to detect is that they hide behind existing biases and assumptions, Washington explained during a closed FBI training session. Discriminatory policing doesn't raise red flags because people expect certain neighborhoods to have higher police presence. Economic displacement gets dismissed as natural market forces rather than engineered outcomes. 8 months after the indictments, Washington and Ayanna attended a community celebration in Westridge, where residents gathered to mark the reopening of a community center that had been closed during Maxwell's attempted takeover of the Proscent neighborhood. Children played on new playground equipment, while adults shared food and stories, reclaiming public space that had once been too dangerous to use due to aggressive policing. During the celebration, Washington was approached by a young black officer from the Reform Department. Officer Michael Carter introduced himself, hesitantly aware of the complicated dynamics between the community and anyone wearing a badge. "I wanted to thank you," Carter said. "I joined the force wanting to help my community, but the culture there made it impossible. What you did created space for officers like me to actually serve and protect everyone equally." He gestured to his community policing partner, an older white officer who had been mentoring recent recruits. "We're trying to build something different now, something that actually works for everyone." This moment reaffirmed Washington's belief that systemic change, while difficult, was possible through persistent effort and accountability. The corruption in Millfield hadn't developed overnight, and genuine reform would likewise take time and continuous vigilance. 2 weeks later, Washington accepted the leadership position of the new FBI unit committed to ensuring that what happened in Millfield became increasingly rare as accountability mechanisms spread nationwide. At his first team meeting, he shared his vision. "Our job isn't just to catch bad officers or corrupt officials. It's to identify and dismantle systems that enable discrimination to become policy, that turn bias into profit, that weaponize people's prejudices against their own interests." As the Millfield cases moved through the courts, Washington occasionally drove through the neighborhoods that had been targeted. Westridge was showing signs of renewal without displacement. Community gardens in formerly vacant lots, homes being repaired rather than demolished, and most importantly, residents walking the streets without the constant presence of patrol. Cars monitoring their every move. The process of healing had begun, though the scars of generations of discriminatory policing would take years to fade. Washington reflected that true justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoers, but about restoring communities and creating systems that protected everyone equally under the law. The Millfield case had demonstrated both how deeply entrenched corruption could become and how powerful the forces of accountability could be when properly applied. It offered a template not just for investigation but for genuine reform, a pathway toward policing that served the entire community rather than narrow interests disguised as public safety. The badge means nothing if it doesn't protect everyone. Washington often reminded his team, and justice isn't justice if it only serves some. What do you think about stories like Terrell Washington's? Should there be more investigations into potential police corruption and discrimination? Or do you believe these are rare, isolated incidents? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about justice and accountability. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear this important message about how systemic change is possible when brave individuals stand up for what's right. Thank you for watching this journey from discrimination to justice. And remember, true change begins when we refuse to accept injustice as normal. See you in the next video. This story reveals how systems of oppression often operate beneath a veneer of legitimacy. What appeared as standard policing was actually a calculated scheme using racial discrimination as a tool for profit. It demonstrates how racial bias can be weaponized not just through individual prejudice, but through institutional structures that enable exploitation. Washington's investigation teaches us that true justice requires both individual courage and systemic reform. One person standing firm against corruption can spark change, but sustainable transformation demands restructuring the systems that allowed abuse to flourish. The case highlights the crucial role of documentation and evidence gathering by communities facing discrimination. Mrs. Jackson's decades of record-keeping proved invaluable, showing that those experiencing injustice often hold the keys to exposing it. Perhaps most importantly, this story illustrates that racial discrimination isn't always driven solely by hatred sometimes. It's coldly calculated for financial gain. Those who exploit existing biases for profit count on society's willingness to accept discriminatory outcomes as normal or inevitable. By connecting discriminatory policing to economic interests, Washington exposed not just what was happening, but why it persisted. The path to justice requires addressing both the symptoms and root causes of discrimination, holding individuals accountable while rebuilding institutions to serve everyone equally. What experiences have you had with law enforcement in your community? Have you witnessed or experienced situations where certain neighborhoods or groups seem to be policed differently than others? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters in this important conversation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help it reach more viewers who need to hear these powerful truths about systemic discrimination and the possibility of change. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into stories of justice, accountability, and the ongoing struggle for equality in America. And if you know someone who works in law enforcement community organizing or simply cares about these issues, please share this video with them. Sometimes understanding begins with a single story that changes how we see the world around us. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most important civil rights investigations of our time. Remember that change is possible when brave individuals stand against injustice and everyday people refuse to accept discrimination as normal.